So, with that being said, it is now past Thanksgiving. I know that some of you guys like to decorate ahead of time like heathens, and we will pray for your salvation. But for the rest of us, Thanksgiving is not just a holiday that we skip. I love Thanksgiving. This year we went to Nat's family's house, and I was feeling a little bit under the weather, and so we didn't go out and do a ton, but the food is just so amazing. It's so good. I know that some people like different things like ham. If you're a ham on Thanksgiving Day, please tell me on your connection card so I can pray for your salvation. This is a turkey day. You enjoy the turkey, and it is so good. But Thanksgiving was always special to me because it was something that my grandma loved to do. I told you guys this last time I spoke, but my grandma loved to cook food, and so Thanksgiving was always one of her favorite holidays. And so Thanksgiving kind of gets me in this mindset where I want to think about her, and I reflect on her life, and I began to think of some of the things that we would do when I was younger. And occasionally, I would get to go and spend the night with her, and she would have me over, and I would sleep on the couch, and she worked the night shift at Wonder Bread. And so she worked at a bread factory. And so typically what would happen is I would go and spend the night at her house. She would make sure that I was okay, and I would go to sleep, and then she would go off to work, and around 4 or 5 in the morning, she would come home, and she would wake me up real gentle, and she'd say, "Hey, Jay, do you want to have breakfast?" And the combination between the invitation to food and the smell of hot baked bread is something that is just ingrained in my memory, right? It is something that was so special. And so we would get up and we would go to the breakfast table, and she would whip me up some hash browns and eggs because that was my favorite. I love me some hash browns and eggs. And we would just sit and talk about life, and I would tell her about all the things that were going on, and she would let me dream about the future, and it was just a fantastic way to start my morning every time I was at my grandma's house. Now, my grandma didn't make a ton of money. She worked at a bread factory, and so she would save up money, and every so often, at the end of our breakfast, she would look at me and say, "Do you want to go on an adventure?" Those were magical words. Do you want to go on an adventure? And I would get so excited. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I was going to throw all my stuff into a bag, throw it into her little Saturn that she drove, and we would get in the car and we would just go. Now, she loved the coast, and so most of the time we would end up somewhere with a beach, and so we would go to places like Pismo, and I don't know if you've ever been to Pismo, but it is not necessarily where you bring your grandma. It is more of kind of like the party scene, right? You got a lot of 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and they have all these off-road machines, and they're having a time of their life, and we would get to Pismo, and she would rent us ATVs. Now, picture this. I'm young, but she's old. And so she would rent us these ATVs, and just picture this old grandma just flying over dunes like, yeah! She's got the little flag flying over, and it was a mess. One time she rolled it, and I thought she died, but she got up and she's like, "That was awesome." I was like, "You're psychotic." Or then we would go to places like Dillon's Beach, and Dillon's Beach is nothing super notable, but it's this small beach town. And it's got these little shops and cool little eateries and all that kind of stuff, and so we would walk around Dillon's Beach. But her favorite place to go, the number one spot that she would take me, is a place called Hearst Castle. How many of you guys have ever heard of Hearst Castle? Hearst Castle is a huge architecture masterpiece that was built by a man named William Randolph Hearst. He was a newspaper mogul and built his wealth, and he literally decided to build a castle. And I used to love going there. As you can see from some of the pictures, it is something that you would imagine when you think of The Great Gatsby. The ballrooms are massive, and the dining room table sits like hundreds of people, and it would have all of these elegant things. He was dedicated to art. Now, I'm not a big art guy, but he loved art. And one of the things that I realized at Hearst Castle was there's a difference between art that you hang on the wall And there's a whole new level of wealth when the art goes from the wall to the ceiling. If you can make that transfer from ceiling or from wall art to ceiling art, you are wealthy. Like, that is the sign that you have officially made it, right? But the two things that always caught my eye were the two pools. The first one on the left, you guys see, is called the Neptune pool, and it is huge. It is absolutely massive. Just in the pure size of it, it is breathtaking. But it is designed as if it was a testament to the Greek mythology. And so all around it has these columns and statues of the Greek gods. And just when you walk into the setting of it, you realize how small of a person you are. It's something that you would maybe see in Vegas or a storyline, but instead it's literally standing in front of you. Now that one's awesome, but the one on the right, that is designed as a Roman bathhouse. And you walk inside and you instantly get transformed into the Roman days. And it has these blue tiles all over the building, and they're small and intricately placed. And it is something that is truly a masterpiece. But if you look closely, everything that you see across the top and through the reflection of the glass is 24-karat gold inlays. This man decided that he was going to make the architecture and the structure purely magnificent. It wasn't just expensive, it was perfection. See, those were the moments that my grandma wanted to instill in me. When she said, "Do you want to go on an adventure?" it was one of those things that she wanted to ingrain in me, a core memory that forever in my lifetime I would remember. And it got me thinking to myself, what would happen to us in our life if we trusted God the same way that I trusted my grandma when she said, "Do you want to go on an adventure?" See, it didn't matter where I went. She didn't tell me where we were going. We would just get in the car and we would go, and I knew two things. I was going to be grateful that I went, and because she was in charge, it was going to be worth going. And those were the only two things that I needed to know when I was a kid. Those were the only two things that I had to understand to be excited for where I was about to go, because I knew that she was in charge. And I wonder what would happen to us as a church if we decided that we were going to put that same trust in us as a church as I did with my grandma when she said, "Do you want to go on an adventure?" See, we've been in this series entitled Gratitude, and I think it's great. Obviously, I love the song. I just told you guys that. But the first week, Pastor Dave talked about having gratitude for what has happened in the past. And then last week, he's talked about having gratitude for what was going on in our present. And this week, I'm tasked with talking about having gratitude with what is going to happen in the future. But anytime that we talk about those three things, it's a great reminder for us as believers that God has done exceedingly and abundantly more in our lives than we could have ever imagined. But there is a shift that happens when we go from talking about the past and the present, because those things are things that we've lived through. Those are the things that we can look back and see the hand of God move in our life. Or even if it's in the present, we may not know where it's going, but as Christians, we have a deeper understanding that God is doing something in the midst of this. But what happens when you think about the three is the first two, the past and the present. We go from lived experiences, things that we've actually gone through, lived experiences, and then when we start to talk about the future, we have to make the transition to faith. We go from lived experiences to faith, and that is one of the hardest jumps, because now we are no longer talking about things that we know for certain, but instead we are trusting in the uncertain. And that is exactly what we see today in our text. If you go with me to Genesis chapter 12, I'm reading out of the NIV version. It says this: "The Lord said to Abram, 'Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family. Go into the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. And all of the families on earth will be blessed through you.'" Let's pray. Jesus, Thank you so much for all that you've done for us in the past and the things that you're doing through us right now. But Father, I ask that as we dive into your word today, that you give us the courage and the strength to trust you with our future. Let today not just be another Sunday, but let today be a day that inspires our faith moving forward. We love you and we praise you. Amen. Now, let me give you a little bit of context of what's going on, because I gave you a snippet, and one of the most important things about the Bible is making sure that everything is in context, right? And so we are introduced to a man named Abram, who will later be known as Abraham. He is one of the legends of the faith. But Abram at this moment is 75 years old. 75. He's not some young tyke. He's not some teenager. He's not even a man that's in distress. He is a 75-year-old man that, to all of our understandings and all of our accounts, is a happy guy, right? He's got a wife that later on we find out is very beautiful. He has his family surrounding him, and he has accumulated what is known as wealth in those days, right? Now, I don't necessarily accumulate having a ton of donkeys as wealth, but he had them. And so this man was wealthy. And so he has all of the comforts of life. And all of a sudden, God comes and has a conversation with him, and it goes like this. Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family. How inconvenient can God be? Right? I mean, think about it. This man has everything that he could want wrapped up in one spot, and God has the audacity to come to him and says, leave all of those things. How inconvenient and inconsiderate can God be, right? Well, if we look at it through human eyes, that's how we see it. But the reality is the schedule that God has us on is not under our own time frame, but it's under his. God does not care about the schedule. He doesn't necessarily worry about the fact that Abram is happy and settled. He wants to know, are you willing to be obedient? Because once we get into a place where we are more concerned about our timeline, our schedule, than what God has in store for us, we begin to miss the blessing. It's so interesting. Every year at summer camp, we put together these little schedules, and I give them to all of the youth pastors. And it's so funny. I hand them to the youth pastors, and I say, don't tell the students what's going on. Do not show them this schedule. And every single year, they freak out. All of the kids keep coming up to me like, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? What are we doing next? And I'm like, chill. Everything's going to be okay. I promise you two things. You will be fed. That is important. You will be fed. And you will know exactly where you are supposed to go, and I will make sure that you get there on time. Other than that, you don't have to worry about it. But our human nature wants to control the schedule so that we can understand what God is going to do so that we can prepare for it. How many of you guys wish that God would just email you a list of what he's going to do over the next year, right? Like, that would be fantastic. I would love to understand where he's trying to take me, but he doesn't operate that way. Why? Because as soon as we understand the schedule, we begin to prepare in ways that God doesn't want us to prepare. A perfect example is I have a friend who recently he started his own business, he got married, he bought a house, and then out of nowhere he started to have panic attacks. Out of nowhere, all of a sudden, now he's faced with this thing that's going on inside of him that has completely changed everything about him for this period of time, for this season. And as he's dealing with those things, I wonder what would have happened if he knew that those things were coming. What decisions would he have made to hold off on to make sure that he was prepared for the season that he was about to walk into? If I knew that that was me, I probably would have held off on starting a business or maybe getting married. But the reality is, all of those things have created a foundation for him to stand on so that as he walks into the season, he has everything that he needs to move forward through the process that God has him on currently. See, when we try to take hold of the schedule, all of the things in our life become malleable. We begin to try to control the things that God says, no, I have a path for you. But you have to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone, step outside of the schedule, so that you can totally trust on me and totally rely on me. See, it's once we step out of the comfort zone, once we step out of the things that we feel familiar with, that is when we begin to see God move in our life, because that's obedience. And so we get to this part of the story where God says, I need you to leave everything. I need you to leave the comforts of your home. I need you to leave your relatives and your family. And I need you to go to the land that I will show you. Now, if you are a type A person, or if you are an Enneagram, I don't know, whatever number, the one that controls things, you are freaking out at this moment. Right? This is one of those types of things where all of a sudden it goes from, okay, you're asking me to make some sacrifices, I understand, but then he says this, go to the land that I will show you. Not the land that I've shown you before, not the land that you're familiar with, not the land that you are comfortable with, not the land that is going to be an upgrade from where you were before. I need you to go and trust that you are going to put one foot in front of the other, knowing that you will end up in the spot that I need you to be, but you don't know where it is yet. That's like if someone came to me and said, Justin, I need you to go home and I need you to pack all of the things out of your house and you will go to the house that I will show you. I'm like, hey, can I see a floor plan first? Like, can I get at least a picture to understand that I'm not moving out of this house that is nice, I like it, everything's good with it, and I'm not moving into a dump? Like, can I have some reassurance of where I'm going? But God doesn't give that to Abram. He just says, go to the land that I will show you. And when we're talking about faith, when we're talking about active faith, this is one of the most impressive things that I've seen a man do. Because Abram actually does it. He actually goes. But the thing about it, having active faith, is this. Our active faith, having faith in the future for God and being grateful for where he's taking us, is hinged on the fact that we don't know where it's actually going to lead. See, this church has been around for almost 100 years. And I know that I've only been a part of it for a few years now. But some of you guys have been around for a long time. And I bet you 100 years ago, if we talked to the people who planted this church, they would not guess where this church would be right now, right? But they had a vision, they had a direction, and God told them to go to the land that I will show you. And so they planted a church in Manteca, California, and began to worship God. And sure, I could imagine that they can guess some of the things that would be happening still, right? Like, I'm sure that they would guess that there would still be a Sunday morning service. I'm sure that they would guess there would be worship and the word and some type of outreach. But the way that we do it was not seen by them, because all they had to do was take the next step. God just says, take the next step. And although you're going to the land that I will show you, there needs to be an understanding that you are headed in the direction that he has called us to. See, 3 years ago, we would have never guessed that we'd have an intern named Jaden Clark who's absolutely crushing it. He is killing it in every way possible. He is producing all of the videos that we post online, and those videos are becoming seen to thousands of people. His ministry is being watched by thousands of people every time he posts it, and it's fantastic. But no one would have guessed that Jaden Clark would be the guy that was going to be the avenue for that. Or like Jimmy. No one would have guessed that we would have hired some redhead named Jimmy from Napa, California. 3 years ago, we didn't even know who he was. But all of a sudden, Jimmy now leads us into the presence of God every single Sunday. And not just that, he leads the district, and thousands of teenagers get to enter into the presence of God through his leadership. We didn't see it, We didn't know what it looked like. We didn't have the name. We didn't have his birthday. We didn't know what Jimmy was until we encountered him by being faithful through the process, by continuing to walk. Or we can take it into the church context. 3 years ago, we would have never guessed that we would be launching a thing called Midweek. But because we were faithful in the process, we have now seen countless families come to know Christ. Countless families get baptized. We've had these amazing encounters in the upper room with our teenagers where the presence of God was so heavy that we just didn't want to leave. We didn't know what it looked like. We just knew that he said, go. And we have to be faithful in the go. And it's intimidating because sometimes that means that we are going to embark on a journey that we aren't totally comfortable with. But God isn't interested in our comfort. He's interested in our obedience. Faith and obedience is a currency of heaven. Faith and obedience are the currency of heaven. See, when we are obedient and then we walk out in faith, all of a sudden God begins to move. Right? It's like Peter when he was on the boat. He's sitting on this boat and Jesus tells him to get out of the boat and walk on water. It took two things. It took obedience for him to be willing to step out. But it also required faith that when his foot planted, it would be on solid ground. And so when we have faith and obedience, we understand that God has begun something in us that he is going to see to completion. But as you guys know from the story of Peter walking on water, faith and obedience only last as long as our eyes are on Jesus. As soon as his eyes were off of Jesus, all of a sudden he began to sink. And so I make you this promise. As a church, as the leadership of the church, we will keep our eyes on Jesus with everything that we have to ensure that we are going in the direction that God has called us. But it is going to take a family to be obedient and faithful to where God is calling us to go. It is going to take a family to be able to embark on the journey that God has for us. And so we have two things that we notice right off the bat from Abram's story. We have obedience from him leaving his native country, and then we have faith for going to the land that is unknown. But it's interesting because God doesn't do those two things without making some promises, right? Now, we could look at this and say, yes, those are promises that he made to Abram, and that's true. But the reality is, God has made promises for us that we can stand on in this moment. The first one is one of the most quoted things in the Bible. It's Jeremiah 29:11. We talk about it all the time. For I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, right? And we love to quote it. If you have a Pinterest board, we love to have it. If you're a grandma, you love to post it, right? This is one of the staple verses of our faith. But the interesting thing about the faith that no one wants to talk about is it says this: I know the plans I have for you. I know. It still requires the same amount of faith and obedience to get to the prosper part. We love to circle and underline the prosper part, but we sometimes forget the fact that there is still a process that God has for us. That is a promise that God has instilled in us, for us, and through us. But the second one that we're standing on as a church is Jesus says, I will build my church and the gates of hell won't prevail. I will build my church, and we have to stand firm knowing that this church has a purpose, and that purpose is to love the people of Manteca, Ripon, Stockton, all of the surrounding areas, because we can be a beacon of light for those who are lost. We can be a place where people come, grow, and serve. Those are the promises that we get to stand on. Those are the promises that were meant for us as a church body, as a congregation, and as for you personally. It's amazing that when God asks you to step out in faith and obedience, there's always a promise. But here's something super interesting that I saw for the first time this week as I was studying the text. If you read it again, it says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous. You will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All of the families on earth will be blessed through you. I will make you a great nation. Did you hear it? I will make you. Not, I have made you. Not, you are a great nation. Not, you are blessed. I will make you, meaning that God, as soon as we go from obedience to faith, we enter into a process. We enter into a process of God beginning to reform our hearts and position us in a way that He is designing us to go. And that process is designed so that you and I can continue to move the kingdom forward. How great is it that we serve a God that allows us to be a part of the process? And that process is designed for you and I to continually grow and develop as followers of Jesus Christ. As I was writing this week, the question popped into my mind, and so I'll share it with you. And the question was this: how much have I grown as a Christian this year? How much have I actually developed as a follower of Jesus this year? Now, the first couple years that you're a Christian, that's kind of like an exponential growth, right? Like there's kind of like this tidal wave of learning that you get to be a part of. But once you kind of develop your relationship with Jesus, if you're anything like me, it begins to kind of level out and coast, right? And God convicted me this week. Are you still growing? Are you still developing as a follower of Christ? Or are you content with where you're at? Content and complacency kill the movement of God. We see it time and time again throughout the scriptures. And let me tell you this. Us as a church, we're doing some really cool things. It's been awesome to watch this church grow over the past few years. It's been really cool to have people join the team and all the things that are going on inside of this church. But if we become content with where we're at, we will die. That is just the truth. And we have to be a church that is planted in the understanding that it is through our development as individuals that we come together corporately and develop this movement of God that begins to spark things like revival that we hear so much about. Revival doesn't necessarily mean some amazing, wonderful thing that's going on. It means that there is a group of people that have a life change, that have a heart shift inside of them. And because of that heart shift, they get to go into the community and they get to share that love that they encountered in this place, at this altar, with all the people that they come encounter with. And that sparks revival. This revival that we're talking about isn't just going to happen overnight, but instead it is something that is going to happen through the investment of the people that we have here. And it is important for us to understand that when God speaks to us, we have to be obedient, we have to have faith, and then we have to trust the process. The process won't always be easy. The process might hurt at times. There might be some pruning that goes on inside of your life. I know that there has been in mine. But through the pruning, we begin to see fruit. And that's what that process that God is talking about is for. See, Abram began his journey and he didn't know where he was going to end up. And multiple times he stopped because he didn't know where he was supposed to go. And through the process, every time he stopped, he would build an altar to worship God. He rededicated himself. Every time you get to a place where you don't know where you're supposed to go next, build an altar for your life, worship God, and continue to seek and find what he has next for us. God is a God of order, and he wants structure. And he is going to give you opportunities to build those altars in your life so that when those times come and you don't know what to do next, you're going to have the opportunity to worship God, and he will continue to guide your steps. But the interesting thing about the story is this. It says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. And then it says this, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. Friends, that's provision and protection. See, we go from obedience to faith into a journey, and once we get into that journey, God promises that he is going to provide and protect us along the way. Yes, it's going to be scary. Yes, we might not know what's going to happen, but we can trust the fact that God is going to provide all the things that we need and protect us as we continue through the process. That provision and protection provides us an assurance that the direction that we are headed is the right way, and that we can stand firm knowing that in this process, he is going to make sure that we have a way out, that we have the direction. See, sometimes we get to a place where we feel overwhelmed or we feel like there's too much, but we forget the fact that God says that he will never give you more than you can handle. He will never give you more than you can handle. And what that means is he is either going to protect you or he is going to provide you a way to navigate the situation, but he will not leave you alone. He will not leave you to the lions, but instead he will stand behind you and in front of you to make sure that you are protected through the process. Now hear me, this is not a prosperity gospel. I'm not saying that through this process you're just going to make a ton of money and everything's going to be nice, right? This will cost you your life. But on the other side is where the promise comes in. And the promise is this: all the families on earth will be blessed through you. See, the things that we're trusting God for, the things that we are grateful for the future, yes, some of those things are what God is doing inside of us. But you know what I'm really grateful for? The thing that I'm really grateful for is my son will come to know Jesus at this altar. And not just my son, but his son and the generations to come, because once we walk in obedience, all of a sudden that sparks in us the faith to take the step that God has called for us. And once we enter into that journey, we begin to see the provision and the protection of God. And although we might not see where he is calling us to, although he is calling us to the land that I will show you, we can trust the fact that through that journey, we will end up in a place that blesses not just us, but the generations to come. And that's what we're fighting for in this moment. And so let me give you a couple quick practicals. Obedience isn't half obedience. Half obedience is disobedience. If you read through the story, he ends up bringing his nephew Lot on the journey, and Lot continues to cause trouble and makes Abram go on these detours that distract him from where God is calling him to go. Now, it didn't disqualify him from where he was supposed to go, but it did make the process longer than it needed to be. And so if God is calling you to be obedient with something, the answer has to be yes, even if it doesn't make sense. When God called me into ministry, it didn't make sense. And I tried to run from it for as long as I could, but it wasn't until I said yes that things started to fall into place. Now, I'm not saying that all of you need to quit your jobs and go be pastors. Please don't. But what I am saying is there's things that God is calling each of us to do that we must be obedient enough to open up our hands and say, God, I am not going to hold on to this so tightly that I refuse to hear what you have to say. We have to be obedient to what God is calling us to. And we have to be faithful. Because when that obedience comes, we don't always know what's going to happen. And sometimes it's going to be scary. Trust me, it was scary leaving my job where I made a good living to go work for a ministry that paid me nothing. My first 2 years of ministry, I didn't get a paycheck. And I just had to trust God that I was going in the right direction. There's going to be things in your life where you just have to say, God, I don't know what you're doing, and I don't understand, and I don't see where this is going to end up, but I'm going to say yes. And God, I might not understand the process, and I might be a little bit fearful, but I'm still saying yes. And sometimes those steps are really big, but sometimes those steps are really small. But the thing about our God is, He allows you to pick the pace in which you move. You can stand still, and God will love you exactly where you're at. But when you stop the process, you have to understand that there is going to be consequences. And so we get to choose how much faith we have. And see, that's why we do things like We Are Refuge, because we believe that God is calling us to do something that is so exponentially bigger than what we originally started with. We're believing in miracles, signs and wonders, and salvations, and families' lives changed forever, and bloodlines changed forever. We're believing in miracles. But that's why we do things like We Are Refuge, because we as a congregation get to take that step and say, God, I don't understand what we're going to do. I don't understand the process that you have us in, but I do know that when I take this step of faith, that everything is going to turn out the way that you want it to. I may not understand it, but I trust. That's why we're doing the We Are Refuge campaign. But once we get to faith, we have to understand that there's going to be a process. And friends, let me tell you, I know that processes are hard. I wish that when I raised my hand for salvation, I just would have went up to the pearly gates and walked to the streets of heaven. But the reality is, that's not the design that God has for us. You were left on this earth for a purpose. And that purpose allows us to both grow closer to God and bring everyone we come in contact with us. And I pray that you become like a magnet, that no matter if you're at a grocery store or a mall or just walking down the street or at a gas station, that you radiate the presence of Jesus in such a way that everyone around you becomes infected with his love. But it's a process. But the only way that we will get through the process is if we trust that the provision and the protection comes from the one above. And that's where we take our lives and say, I'm not going to lean on my own understanding, but I'm going to leave it in the hands of the maker of heaven. He hasn't let me down yet. I've been scared. There's been moments when I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. There have been moments when I did not know where my next meal was coming from. You guys have heard my story. But he has been faithful through the process. And he has protected me every step of the way. And when we do that, when we trust in God, we walk the process through faith and obedience. The blessings that we see will not just affect you in your lifetime, but they will affect generations to come. And that's the process that we're on today. And so, friends, I want to ask you a question. Do you want to go on an adventure? Do you want to see what God has in store for us? I might not know where it's going to lead. I might not have the destination. But I know two things. My Father that is taking us, because he's taking us, it will be worth it. And you will be so grateful that you came. So this is what I want to do tonight. I want to pray for the future of our lives and the future of this church. And then if you want to go on an adventure, if you want to take that step with me, can we come down to this altar and rededicate this future of Refuge Church to him? Can we just plant the trust back in God and say, God, we might not know where this is going, but we know that you're in control. You're in the driver's seat, and because of that, I will be a passenger and not a backseat driver. I am going to trust in you in every way possible. I don't need the GPS. I just need to know if I'm supposed to go left or right. And so when I'm done praying, if that's you, if you want to go on this wild adventure that we call faith, join me up front. Jesus, thank you so much for my family. Thank you so much for the fact that you have called us to the future and that you don't have plans to harm us, but instead you have plans to prosper us. And Father, I know that even though we might not know where we're supposed to go, we know that you're in charge. And because of that, we stand firm on the promise of God that you will build your church, that you have plans to prosper us. And we know that you will not ever go back on your word. And so God, in this moment, we put our trust back in you. We put our faith in you, and we commit ourselves to being obedient to the things that you have for us and walking the process that you have set before us. God, we give this church to you. We give our lives to you. We give our future to you. And we do all of this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. If you want to come on that adventure with me, come on up to the front and worship.